Most people think the Pepsi-Kendall Jenner ad failed because of bad execution. Wrong. The execution was fine, actually. The production was polished, casting was A-list, music was good, visuals were clean, all that stuff. None of that was the problem. The problem happened before the director ever said action. It happened in the strategy room. Problem happened in the brief. And that's what makes this ad, in my opinion, one of the most important case studies in modern advertising. Not because it was bad, but because of exactly where and why it went wrong. Because there's a high likelihood, I'll say, that some version of this mistake is happening in your work right now. Hopefully not, but it might be. And that's okay, because that's what we're here for, to learn and to fix, okay? Let's break this down. I'm gonna set the scene for you. It's 2017. I can't believe that was almost 10 years ago. Insane, right? The Black Lives Matter movement is at the center of the cultural conversation. Protests are happening across America. Young people are marching in the streets. They're passionate. They're concerned, right? And Pepsi, like every other brand watching this, sees an opportunity. Pepsi's like, hey, our audience are young people, and young people care about social movements, so we should be associated with social movements. Yeah, that's the ticket right there. One plus one plus one equals three, right? That's the logic. And on the surface, it sounds reasonable. But here's the question they should have asked before asking anything else. What do young people actually feel about social movements right now? Feel. Not how can we associate with them, not how do we appear relevant, not what imagery can we borrow, or celebrities can we use. It's Super Bowl, or I don't know if it's Super Bowl, I think it was, I hope not. Um, but what do they actually feel? If they had asked that question honestly and sat with it long enough to find a real answer, they would have found something true, something specific, and something that belonged to them and only them. Okay, maybe they would have found the exhaustion of having to explain why their lives matter. Maybe they would have found the loneliness of showing up to a protest, wondering if anything will actually change. I don't know. Maybe they would have perhaps found the complicated mixture of hope and frustration and fear that defines what being young and politically awake was in 2017. See, any of those would have been a real insight. Any of those would have given Pepsi a place to stand. But they didn't ask that question. They asked a completely different one. Now, listen, here's what the work tells us that they were thinking. And I want to be clear, the actual brief was never made public. Nobody outside Pepsi and the agency had seen it. But here's the thing, you can actually reverse engineer any brief from the work that was produced. And this ad tells us everything. The brief was basically, more or less, how do we make Pepsi feel culturally relevant to young people who care about social issues? Okay? I'm going to read that again. How do we make Pepsi feel culturally relevant to young people who care about social issues? Hmm? Notice the difference though? It's not what do young people actually feel, but how do we appear relevant to young people? Those aren't the same question. They're fundamentally, catastrophically different questions. Because one question leads you to a human truth, the other one leads you to a marketing objective dressed up as an insight. And that distinction right there, that's the difference between an ad that moves culture and an ad that gets pulled within 24 hours in what was basically humiliation on a global level. Okay. What is the ad they actually made? You can see it behind me, right? You've probably all seen it. Kendall Jenner, is at a photo shoot. She sees a protest happening outside. So she yanks off her wig, super dramatic, right? Joins the protest, walks to the front, and hands the police officer a Pepsi. The officer takes it. He takes a sip. The crowd cheers, like Jordan hit a game-winning shot, right? No. Conflict resolved, right? Pepsi wins, yay, right? Wrong. I want you to sit with, and I know you all saw this when it happened. Maybe you couldn't put your finger on it, but you all saw it and felt it at least. I want you to sit with how tone deaf this is. Real protests in 2017 were not resolved by a celebrity handing a cop a freaking soda. Okay? Real protesters were being arrested, they were being tear gassed, they were being shot with rubber bullets, right? Real people were risking their safety to stand up for something they believed in with every fiber of their beings. Pepsi looks at all that looked at the most significant civil rights movement of a generation. They said, what if we put Kendall Jenner in the middle of it with a Pepsi? Yeah, she hands it to a cop. We're all friends. Yay, whatever. Look, the inside problem wasn't that they chose a wrong execution. The inside problem was that they actually had no insight. They had optics, right? They're trend chasing. They had a celebrity and a cultural moment, and the assumption that proximity to meaning is the same as meaning. Newsflash, it's not. Optics are not insights. Trends are not human truths. A celebrity is not a strategy. And when you build a campaign on optics instead of insight, the audience always knows. They may not, but they'll feel the hollowness. They'll feel that exploitation, that inauthenticity before they can articulate why, right? And then they'll post about it on social media until the brand issues an apology and pulls the ad. And if you need any more proof of that, the fact that this was not a brief problem and not an excuse me, that this was a brief problem and not an execution problem, look at the tagline they ended on. Live bolder, live louder, live for now. That's not a protest insight. That's a Pepsi brand platform. That right there is the tell. Because what they actually wanted to say, what the real brief probably was, is something like Pepsi is for people who live boldly and don't hold back. That's fine. That's actually a legitimate brand position. Okay. But instead of building a campaign around that human truth, instead of finding the person who genuinely lives boldly and showing us what that looks like, instead of doing that, they borrowed the visual language of a social movement to make live, or live bold, whatever, feel more urgent and culturally relevant. The protest footage was costume, live bolder, right? Live louder, live for now was the actual message underneath it. And when the costume doesn't fit, when the borrowed imagery is too charged, too real, and too painful for many people, the audience rips it off and shows everyone what's underneath, as well they should have. A soda brand wanted to feel important. That's what it came down to. That's it. They're just stealing for the cultural moment, using celeb for celeb's sake and all that stuff, right? You hear that? Soda brand just wanted to feel important. I'm gonna go a little bit deeper on this, okay? Because this is one of the most important lessons in this whole breakdown. There's a test I run in every brief. I call it the ownership test, okay? Ask yourself this. Could any other brand run this campaign? And if the answer is yes, you don't have an insight, you have a theme. The Pepsi-Kendall Jenner ad, whatever you want to call this thing, could have been run by Coca-Cola, right? Could have been run by Nike, could have been run by McDonald's, Celsius Energy, Red Bull, whatever. It doesn't matter. It could have been done by literally any brand that wanted to appear relevant to young people in 2017. Okay, there was nothing about the human truth that they were working from. Okay, if you can even call it that truth, right? If you can call it that, yeah. Now, here's what I want you to do. I want you to compare this to the real beauty sketches from Dove. Okay, could any other brand have run that campaign? Not really. I mean, Dove owns the territory of women's relationships with their own appearance. They had been building that equity for years. The Real Beauty campaign was a natural extension of a long-term commitment to a very specific human truth. That's the difference between insight and optics. Insight is owned. Insight belongs to you. Insight comes from a genuine understanding of your audience's inner life, not from watching what's trending and trying to get close to it. Optics are borrowed and rented and can be taken back at any moment, especially when culture decides you don't deserve them, just like this case. Pepsi tried to rent the cultural authority of the Black Lives Matter movement. The culture took it back immediately, as well they should have. Okay, so here's what you take, what I want you to take into every brief you work on. Before you think about execution, before you think about casting visuals, music, tone, whatever, all that stuff, ask yourself this question. What does this person, by this person, I mean the end user, right? People watching, the consumer, what do they actually feel? Not what do they think, not what cultural movement are they adjacent to, not what trend can we borrow, what do they actually feel? And then ask, does this human truth belong to our brand? Have we earned the right to speak to it? Is there a genuine connection between this truth and what we can do? If the answer is no, go back, keep digging, find the truth that's yours. Because here's the thing nobody in that Pepsi conference room apparently said out loud. They should have. A brand that borrows meaning it hasn't earned doesn't just fail to connect. It actively destroys trust. It signals to the audience that you see their most deeply held values as a marketing opportunity. And once they feel that, once they feel used, guess what, folks? They don't forget it, as well they shouldn't. This Pepsi ad didn't just fail. It got people pissed off at Pepsi for years. Pissed off at Pepsi. Say that 10 times fast. Okay? Got pissed off for Pepsi. That is the cost of mistaking optics for insight. Don't let it happen to your work. Okay? Find the human truth. Earn the right to speak it. Build everything else from there. Everything else comes from that. Okay? That's what the Insight Foundry teaches. It's not how to avoid controversy, excuse me. It's how to find the truth that's so real and so specific to your brand that nobody can question whether you've earned it. Okay? My link is in the description. I want you to come find us. Let's talk, okay? I'm going to see you in the next breakdown next time, right? Coming up on the Insight Foundry. So I want you to subscribe for weekly breakdowns of the best, worst ads, right? I go through the best and the worst, and some of them in between. You know, it's I call it the famous and the infamous, okay? And all of them are gone through the lens of human insight. Next up, and I say this with all respect in the world to Gary Vaynerchuk. Gary V, what up, dog, if you're listening? Because the man's a genuine legend, okay? His agency, VaynerMedia, they produced a Raisin Bran commercial called Will Shat. It's campaign with William Shatner. And it's a perfect example of something I see all the time. Incredible talent, big time money and resources, A-list celeb, and not one semblance of an insight underneath it. Not a controversy or a scandal, just a missed opportunity that a stronger brief could have fixed in an afternoon. That's the breakdown. And honestly, it's one of the most instructive ones we're going to do on this channel, okay? So we'll see you there.